Hey guys, so we're going to try this out. This is our very first video. This is to help you with chapter 12 of your workbook. And so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go through and I'm going to help hopefully provide you with some answers, some instruction to help you understand it, but also to help you complete these pages, especially if you didn't bring a book home and you only have your workbook. But what we're going to do is we're going to dive into an intro to genetics. We already covered a lot of this in class, but we're going to kind of re-go over it just so we can help you get your workbook stuff completed and try to make this learning at home as easy as possible. So this is an intro to genetics, lesson 1, the work of Gregor Mendel. Now, if you'll recall, Gregor Mendel is what we call the father of modern genetics. He was an Austrian monk. He lived in actually what is now the Czech Republic. But anyways, he was a monk, so he had some time on his hands, and many monks in this time period were researchers. They were scientists. And so many of the big breakthroughs that we have in a lot of our modern understanding of science actually came from Christians or from monks, different people who studied in these monasteries and these universities. He was one of these people that was very curious about the world around him, and he worked in the garden at the monastery, and he began to notice some interesting things about characteristics of pea plants, of all things. But they made good test subjects because nobody cared if he crossed pea plants with one another. They had several different characteristics, in fact 7 characteristics that he monitored and studied, and they bred quickly. He could cross-pollinate them and control which ones bred with which. Nobody cared, and they bred quickly, so he could run lots of experiments in the span of several years. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of go through it. If you look at page 150 in your workbook, excuse me, I'm sorry, not 150. If you will look at page 141, we're going to start on page 141 and kind of outline a sequence of events here, what happened with Gregor Mendel and what he did. So the first thing, Mendel observed that he had these pea plants and they were true breeding pea plants. All right, that's the first thing that he observed, that he had true breeding pea plants. So what did he mean by true breeding? Well, it means that he had pea plants that always produced green seeds. All right, and then there were others that always produced yellow seeds 100% of the time. And so that was what true breeding was. And so he got the idea. He says, okay, well, this is happening, this is going on. When I cross these together, they always produce green, they always produce yellow. And so he got the bright idea. He says, but wait, what if I cross these true breeding stocks? So what if I took my green pea plants and I crossed them with the yellow seeded pea plants? What would happen? What am I going to get? And so this was kind of the second in this series of events here. And what he observed from this laid the foundation for pretty much all of our modern understanding of genetics. Now, it's far more complicated than what he studied. But this right here, when he observed that all of the F1 generation, what he chose to call the F1 generation, okay, this is the first generation of offspring, they all had the characteristics of only one of the parents involved in this cross, which is interesting. So we crossed green seeded pea plants with yellow seeded pea plants. Only one of them came out. Only one color of seeds came out in the cross. And so Mendel concluded from this, there must be some sort of characteristic that is controlled by factors. Now that's an important word there, that word factors. He used this word to describe what was happening inside of them because he had no knowledge of DNA. He had no knowledge of modern genetics. He was laying the groundwork for these things. And so he called them factors. He said there's something inside of here that is causing them to be these colors, and it is inherited. It is inherited. It is passed on from parent to offspring. This right here, folks, this laid the foundation for all of modern genetics. This explains why you look maybe more like one of your parents. This explains why you have your biological gender, male or female. This explains why you have dimples or freckles or brown hair or blue eyes. Now, human genetics are a lot more complicated than these pea plants, but this explains why, or at least this explains maybe not the how, but the why that these pea plants had a certain color and grew to a certain height and had a certain flower color, had wrinkled seeds versus smooth seeds, had inflated pods versus constricted pods, all kinds of things. So 7 different traits he studied. And so from this particular cross, he says, okay, well, I crossed all of these, and let's say that perhaps it was purple flowered pea plants, and he crossed them with the white flowered pea plants. Well, by this scenario, the F1 generation were 100% purple. And so he says, okay, so they've inherited that. Well, then he decides, okay, what if I take these right here, and what if I do this? What if I take my F1 generation and I cross-pollinate with itself? What do we think is going to happen? Well, he did just that with all of these traits, not just flower color or seed color, but all 7. And in every single one of these, right here, these F1 crosses with each other that produced what we call the F2 generation, he observed this, the hidden trait. It showed back up in the F2 generation. So we crossed purple with white, right? Purple and white. We get all purple. This is F1. What if we cross this with itself? Well, now all of a sudden we get about 75% purple, and we get about 25% white in what we would call the F2 generation. So he says, okay, why is that? And this next observation, this observation here laid the groundwork for one of his final conclusions, and he says, okay, we're going to call this kind of principle of dominance, and he just concludes, he says, there are some factors. Nowadays, we call these alleles. That's an important word there, alleles. These are different variations, different versions of a single gene. And he called them factors, but he says there's some that are dominant and others that are recessive. In other words, some can hide others and the others get hidden. And so this really laid the groundwork for a lot of what Mendel did and a lot of what we understand nowadays in genetics. Okay, so he called them factors. We're going to call them alleles. So let's look a little bit more in depth at this. So every gene that you have, every gene that anything has, should have 2 copies of it. If the parents came, if it was produced by sexual reproduction. And so there's 2 copies of every gene. We call these alleles. All right, it is just simply a copy of a gene. A variation that it has. All right, so everybody inherits 2. So let's look at the flower color in these pea plants that Mendel had. Well, if you have a true breeding purple flowered pea plant, it would have 2, and we're going to designate this with capital P's because the purple was what was dominant. Okay, so we're going to say this is a true breeding pea plant. All right, and it is true breeding purple. Another word that we use for this is a big word here, homozygous. Okay, the prefix homo means same. Homozygous, as in zygote, it has to do with the offspring. Homozygous meaning it has 2 of the same letters. Okay, these 2 letters right here are both capital P's. Now, what if it was white? Okay, what if it was white? Let me add a pin here. All right, if it was white, we would get, we're not going to use W's, we're going to stick with the same letters to show that these go together. Let me erase these lines here just for clarity's sake here in a moment. Now, these are going to be lowercase p's because it's recessive, and my p's all look very similar, so I'm going to use lines over top of the lowercase. This is also a true breeding pea plant, but it's true breeding recessive. All right, so it is also homozygous. Both letters are the same, 2 lowercase, but it is homozygous recessive. The purple was homozygous dominant. Okay, so let's clear out some of this real fast, and what we're going to see here is that what happens when we actually make one of these crosses. Okay, so we have big P, All right, and we chose to cross that with little p, little p. All right, and so what we can do is a Punnett square. And actually, we'll tell you what, we'll get into that in the next video. So stay tuned.